Hello, wildlings. I'm your Creepsmith, and you found my Fear Forge. Lucky you.
Today's daunting diegesis, The Glaring Mirror, by McIndoe. I'm not one for superstition or believing in the paranormal, but some things just can't be explained. I suppose that we resort to the supernatural as a last resort. Well, after what happened to me, I'm still not sure what to believe. I guess I'm kinda still in denial, just shrugging it off, assuming that it didn't really happen. Who knows? This all started when I was 12. I was living with my parents in an old manor back in England. It was a home for the elderly. It was owned by my grandmother. My parents both worked there full time. I went to the school down the road. I mean, it was a quiet town, not much happened there, so naturally I turned to exploring the old house, checking out the attic and the cellar, wandering around the corridors. The old people there in the home scared me, I won't lie. Often at night they'd shriek and scream, and for a young boy that was pretty unnerving. My parents and I lived on the floor below the attic, reserved just for us. They were always so worn out from work that they'd often sleep through the scary wailings of the old women and the scratching noises on the old wooden ceiling above my bedroom. I was scared of that at first, but my fear eventually turned into a kind of curiosity, and I worked up the courage to explore the attic again. I searched for this scratching sound. Mom and Dad were down in the kitchens helping the other staff cook lunch for the residents, so I borrowed a chair from my mom's dressing table and stood up on it, fingers outstretched, reaching for the door to the loft. With an old, creaky groan and a waft of dust and mildew, the door swung downwards and the rusty metal ladder rattled noisily down. I took a big breath, and up I climbed. It was the same up there as it had always been. The untouched boxes of old residents' belongings were stacked in uneven rows, looking a bit ominous in the dull gray light from the small window at the far end of the room. Of course, it was silent at first. Then the scratching began. I turned around, standing solid, and my eyes searched frantically for the source of the sound, but I couldn't see anything. So I walked back past the ladder and to the darkest end of the attic, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling. But I carried on and just walked past more and more boxes until at the end of the room, leaning against the wall, was a mirror with no dust on it. It was an intriguing thing, with an intricate pattern carved into the frame resting on two legs, and it had one of those pegs in the middle so you could flip it over. It was as tall as I had been when I was 10. The scratching had stopped, but I walked toward the mirror anyway. I was fascinated. It had some chips in the glass around the edges, and there was a crack in the top of the oval, but other than that, it looked in pretty good condition. So I instantly decided that it would come with me and live in my room. Later that same day, I whined until my dad carried it down for me. He was unsure as to why I wanted such an odd thing in my room. I mean, let's be honest, old antique mirrors are not exactly the thing for a 10-year-old boy. But still, this mirror did have a certain charm about it. It was that same night that it was in my room that the paranormal things began to occur. I woke up to the scratching noise again and reflexively looked upwards, but the sound wasn't coming from the attic. It was coming from the mirror. Perplexed, I flicked on the lights and stared at it. It stared back at me with my reflection. But then, just off to the side, I saw the face of a man. A little Chinese man glaring at me from underneath my bed in my reflection. I swung my head over the side of my bed and saw nothing. There was nobody there. I thought I'd just imagined it, but then I looked back at the mirror and there he was, that same man, angry and glaring, his presence malevolent, staring at me from outside my window. I rubbed my eyes and gaped, then started for the windows, so of course there was nothing there. This went on for years as I grew up. We moved out of that house and down further south into a smaller home for the elderly. Again, we lived on the top floor, and again, the mirror went to my room. It scared the crap out of me, but I was still curious. Who was this old man in the mirror? He was angry. He never spoke or moved. He just glared at me, his head poking out from random spots each time I looked back at him. It was when I reached 17 that I decided I was going to find out more. Who was he? What was he doing? But I didn't find anything, and nothing came to me. I asked my grandmother if he had been an old man who'd once lived at the home. He wasn't. She didn't know where the mirror had come from either. I did research on the internet and came across a website that warned of spirits in mirrors, but I couldn't help but laugh at that. The site was constantly popping up with reminders and offers of voodoo instruments and dick pills and that sort of thing. I just ignored these. I didn't ask either of my parents for their advice. They were still working flat out to keep the business going. It was on my 18th birthday that the man inside the mirror finally did something unusual, even for him. He moved whilst I was looking at him. I was lying on my bed the morning after a night out drinking with friends. I was feeling a little worse for wear and just watching him with an amused expression. His expression, however, remained angry. His head was peeking out of my wardrobe door. But then, my eyes widened as a withered arm reached out past the door, then the other, then his legs. This angry little man was moving in my mirror. He wore nothing but a black pair of shorts. His skin was pale, wrinkly, like he hadn't seen sunlight in many years, and his eyes, they seemed to grow angrier than before. I stared wide-eyed and shocked, and a cruel smirk turned up on his lips as he walked toward the mirror. I slowly stood up from my bed and walked toward my side of the glass. My reflection changed before my eyes. I couldn't believe it. My reflection became the man inside the mirror. I stood now only a few feet from the glass, staring. He glared back, his eyes now showing a vicious crimson. That smirk was back, and he raised his right hand toward me. And, unthinking, I did the same thing. My fingertips were reaching for his for mine. His eyes were widening, smirk extending. I could see his yellow teeth between his gnarled, cracked lips. And we never lost eye contact. But the split second before my fingertips would have touched the mirror and the man, my door flew open with a bang, and stunned, I spun around. It was my grandmother with a portrait of that same Chinese man. There was a deafening roar of unmistakable rage, the noise so loud I dropped to my knees and covered my ears. My grandmother gritted her teeth and still focused on the mirror. The disturbing sound stopped, and I stood up, panting for breath. I looked at grandmother. She smiled at me before gasping and dropping the old portrait of the man who, even on canvas, looked as angry and terrifying as he had in the mirror. The frame snapped and the canvas flopped face down onto the floor. I turned around, half expecting to see the fellow standing right in front of me, but no, I only saw the mirror. But there, scratched into the mirror in sharp, elongated letters, was the word soon. Yes, if you have an artifact of evil that absolutely positively has a spirit in it that means you harm, yeah, you always take that with you, right? Stay scary, wildlings. Try and use your common sense and make the most of your nights.